Hey everyone, Cedar here. Today we're talking about Psych Chapter 3, Learning and Memory. There's a lot to go over in this chapter, so we need to get right into it. But if you need to play the video, pause it. I would even say slow me down a little bit, because I know sometimes I talk a little fast. Put that speed down to, half the speed or something like that. And so you have time to pause the video in between, write it down, pause the video, write it down, etc. So let's get started. Okay, so first let's start with classical conditioning, which is taking advantage of a reflexive, unconditioned response and stimulus to turn a neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus to elicit a conditioned response. So what I mean by that is like Pavlov's dogs, right? So I'm sure you've heard the story, but Pavlov's dogs, basically what he did was, so dogs will salivate. So if they smell their food, they will start to salivate. So the food is an unconditioned stimulus, right? And the salivation is an unconditioned response. That's just something that they just naturally will do, right? When they smell the food. So what Pavlov did with his dogs was, every time he gave them the food, he rang a bell, right? So you'd say, here's your food, they start to salivate, and he'd ring the bell, give them the food. So what happens when you do that is later on, all he had to do was ring the bell and the dogs would start to salivate. So this is what we're talking about here. So we have unconditioned stimulus. So the unconditioned stimulus is the food, in this case. The unconditioned response is the salivation. The conditioned stimulus is the bell, because we've just conditioned them to think that this bell, right, will give them the food. So that conditioned stimulus that causes the salivation is the bell. And then the conditioned response to the bell is the salivation. So now they don't just need the food to salivate, they just need to hear the bell and they will start to salivate. So that is classical conditioning. So you're taking a reflexive, right, innate, unconditioned response stimulus and turning a neutral stimulus, which was the bell, into a conditioned stimulus. So now when you ring the bell, it elicits the conditioned response, okay? So another type of learning is operant conditioning. What we see here is behavior is learned through the use of consequences. So let's just say also that a primary reinforcement or punishment is innate. So a primary reinforcement, is innately something that we want. A primary punishment is something that we innately know that we don't want. For example, primary reinforcement would be a food. A primary punishment would be like hitting. So if you did something wrong, someone hit you, we don't need to learn that hitting causes pain and it's bad. We just automatically know that that's a punishment, right? When a secondary reinforcement or punishment is something that we've learned, for example, money, we've learned that money is a good reward, we've learned that getting bad grades, right? It's a learned behavior that is bad. So that's the difference there. So a reinforcement increases the likelihood of behavior, while a punishment decreases the likelihood of behavior. A positive response is when you're adding something, and a negative response is when you're taking something away. So if I tell my child that, if you do well on your report card, I'll buy you a dog, right? I'm increasing the likelihood of their behavior, right? And it's a positive reinforcer because I'm adding something. I'm giving them a dog, right? But if I said, if you do well on your report card and you don't have to take out the trash, that is a negative reinforcement, right? Because I'm increasing the chance that they'll get a good report card, but I'm not necessarily giving them something. I'm taking away something, right? Taking away the chore that they don't like. So that's how you use this. So these things are very, very important. So just know what can be a positive reinforcement or a punishment and a negative reinforcement or punishment, because there can be all four of those. Okay, so next we have reinforcement schedules. So this is when do you actually give this reward based on the behavior. So there's 4 types of schedules. So there's fixed ratio, which you give reinforcement after a certain number of behaviors. Then there's variable ratio, which is when you give the reinforcement after a random number of behaviors. So if you have a dog and that you want them to sit, so if you say after every 3 times that I say sit and he sits, okay, I say it again, sit and he sits, sit and he sits, every 3 times of that, I'll give you a treat, and it's on that kind of schedule. But variable ratio is I say sit, he sits, I say sit, he sits, I give him a treat, the next time I don't, the next time I don't, oh, maybe this time I will. So just a variable like that. Then we have a fixed interval, which is giving the reinforcement after a specific period of time. So every 10 minutes of doing this behavior, I'll give you a reward. And then there's variable interval, which is after an inconsistent period of time. So maybe after 10 minutes of the behavior, I'll do it. After 2 minutes of you doing the behavior, I'll do it the next time. After 20 minutes the next time. So that is just on a variable interval. So best for learning, it's been proven that fixed ratio is the best for learning, and that the best to maintain behavior is on variable ratio. Okay? All right, so that covers kind of, we do have more definitions up here for learning. So we have habituation, and you're becoming used to a stimulus. We have dishabituation, which is being resensitized, the resensitization of an original stimulus. You have associative learning, which is pairing a stimulus and a response with behavior, pairing a stimulus and a response, or pairing behavior with consequences, right? So that is operant conditioning and classical conditioning. Then we have observational learning, which is the acquisition of behavior by watching. We have latent learning, which is learning that occurs but not immediately. So, if somebody's watching you do something, even though you don't in that moment see them replicating the behavior or learning, later down the road when they're in that situation, they have learned what to do. So that is latent learning. And then we have insight learning, which is when a solution appears like a light bulb moment. So you've been working, and then, aha, I know what to do to solve this problem. That is insight learning. So those are just some other definitions that are important to know for this chapter. Okay, so next let's get into consciousness. And this is starting to get into our memory portion. So we have conscious altering drugs. We have depressants, which reduce nervous system activity. So they increase GABA. This is, for example, alcohol and barbiturates. Then we have stimulants. Stimulants increase dopamine, increase norepinephrine, and increase serotonin. For example, cocaine. We have opiates and opioids, which decrease pain, but can cause death by respiration depression. And then we have hallucinogens, which distort reality. They increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, for example, LSD and ketamine. So those are some examples. Okay, so next let's look at our memory tree here. So we have sensory memory, which is which decays very quickly. Short-term memory, long-term memory. Our long-term memory is broken up into explicit and implicit. So for implicit memory, that's acquired skills. For example, procedural memory, right? Just riding a bike, tying our shoe, things like that. Procedural memories. Then we have explicit, right, long-term memories, which is conscious recall. So that is declarative memory that can either be episodic or semantic. So episodic by experience, whereas semantic can kind of be concepts or other things that we remember and that we know. So next we have, I know this is a huge chunk of just definitions, and I'm sorry, but we know Psych does this to us. So encoding, right? Encoding is the process of putting information into memory. So you can have all of these stimuli everywhere, but you don't remember every single detail of everything. So encoding is the actual act of putting the information to memory. Then we have semantic networks, which stores facts and concepts linked together by similarities, and this can trigger associative memories. Okay, so for example, if I say MCAT, you think doctor, white coat, medical school, then doctor will make you think of hospital, nurses, this, and you kind of build this whole tree of concepts in your mind, right, that you're linking all these things together. Then we have retrieval, which is recognition is stronger than recall, but you also have priming, so priming questions. So if I, say, I can't think of an example on the spot. Let me think. Priming. So that's like nothing's coming to mind. I'm sorry. Priming. For example, if you walked into a room and I showed you all you saw on the wall was hamburgers, hot dogs, salads, ice cream, all this stuff, and now I bring you in a room and we start talking about, like, you know, what kind of food you like, or are you hungry, or things like that. Like, I've primed you in a way that you say things that I want you to say, kind of like a bias a little bit, but this is all in terms of memory. I can't think of an example on the spot. I do understand what it is, but I'm just really blanking right now. So if you guys want to look up an example of priming, that might be helpful to better understand that concept. Sorry about that. And then we have semantic networks, which, as we said, a lot of the time with the priming, I know they've given examples of, like, for like eyewitness testimonies, people need to be careful with that, and just basically directing you towards the answer type thing. But like I said, you can look up an example of that. Now we have interference. So interference is, we have retroactive interference, which means new memories make you forget the old ones. And then we have proactive interference, which is when old memories interfere with you making new memories. Tons of examples of those. So for encoding, I know we mentioned that before. You have rehearsal, organization, semantics, chunking, dual encoding, which is when you have like audio and visual, right, to help you. Mnemonics, self-experiences, all those things are how you can encode information. And then for retrieval, you have semantic networks, free recall, cue recall, recognition, priming, the state that you were in, the context you were in, so you'll remember things. If you went to this special restaurant with your cousin, the next time that you walk into that restaurant, you'll start to remember what it was like, and you'll start to think back to the last time you were in that same situation and the feelings you felt and what you did. So, okay, now these are some more definitions. So we have source monitoring errors, which is misidentifying sources of information. Where did this information come from? Did I read it from a textbook? Did I hear it from a video? That is source monitoring errors. We have false memories, which are fabricated recollections of events, right? We have anterograde amnesia, which is the loss of the ability to create new memories. Retrograde amnesia is the loss of the access to your previous memories. That happens a lot of the time if you have some type of accident that affects your brain. You can experience either of those two things. We have flashbulb memories, which remembers the details of an episodic memory because of the emotion you felt at that time. For example, on 9/11, a lot of people remember where they were, what they were doing on that day because of the emotion that is tied to that situation. Then we have eidetic memory, which is the same as a photographic memory. Prospective memory is remembering to remember something. So it's remembering to remember. I do that a lot. We have peg words, which connects words to numbers. And the example I've seen is like, okay, your shoes, the sun is number 1. 2 is the shoes. 3 is, like, you know, so they just connect the numbers to words, and for some people that helps you remember. For me personally, I don't find it that helpful, which is why I don't have a great example of that. But and then we have method of loci, which is a method to remember things as if you're walking through a house. When you walk through the house, the first thing you see is the door. And let's say you need to remember, you know, the digestive system. So you're walking through the house, you see a door. Okay, the door is your mouth. Then you walk through the front door, you put your shoes down, and you see this hallway. This hallway serves as your trachea. And then you go to the window, and you can go this way or this way. And that means it's your, you know, going through another doorway through the epiglottis, and you kind of vision yourself in that location. So that is that. I do have a couple of memory diseases that I wasn't able to fit on the board, but I wanted to mention anyways. So we have Alzheimer's, which is a degenerative brain disorder due to the loss of acetylcholine in your neurons that link to your hippocampus. We have Korsakoff syndrome, which is memory loss caused by thiamine deficiency in the brain, and that can cause retrograde and anterograde amnesia like we spoke about. And then we have agnosia, which is the loss of the ability to recognize objects, peoples, and sounds, and that is usually caused by physical damage. So those were just some types of memory diseases that I couldn't really fit on our board here, but they are definitely important. And another quick fact that is important to remember for this chapter is rehearsal, right? So when you're recalling information and you're rehearsing it to yourself, people can remember on average a list of 7 plus or minus 2 things, which is why phone numbers are only a certain amount of numbers, because that's the average of what people can just remember from rehearsing. So just another important fact. Yeah, and short-term memory decays between 15 and 30 seconds. Another important fact. So thank you for coming to or tuning into our video today. I hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are. If you have any questions, please put them below. I know a lot of content in this video. Sorry about that, but we've got this, and we'll see you in the next video.